Hello everyone, I'm Cozzy and welcome to Patch Notes, your roundup for every bit of video game news over the past month. Everyone says that January is the slowest time of the year, but if that's true I can't wait for next month because I already have 243 bits of news to share. Let's get to it. January opened off to a great start with a New Year's present from Fumito Ueda, Shadow of the Colossus' director, teasing the first game from his independent studio, Gen Design. People investigating the source files found the hidden text Beauty and the Beast 2018, hinting at a project name and release window, which was later corroborated by a second teaser image later in the month. On the complete opposite side of ringing in the new year, several people banned from Team Fortress 2 stirred up some juicy drama by saying they were blacklisted because their username just coincidentally happened to contain Catbot, the name of an open source cheat program. For some reason, everyone on the net fully believed this for about a day, until it was revealed the people complaining had all publicly forked and favourited the bot on GitHub. Platinumgames opened up the floor to game ideas from their staff members, which led to 70 different design documents being pitched, and an announcement they will be making a mid-budget AA title with their very own IP, with the signature character action flair that they've honed working on licensed titles. Unfortunately, the rest of the week saw news head in a worse direction, with almost all CPUs made since 1995 revealed to be vulnerable to Meltdown Inspector, two methods of exploiting a design flaw to steal personal information. I'm not qualified to talk in depth about these flaws, so I'll point you to Scott Manley, a guy who is, and just focus on how exactly they affect gaming. Although the exploits were mostly patched before they became public knowledge, an unlucky side effect of that fix is that Intel CPUs now run up to 30% slower. Other than the obvious disadvantage to gamers with Intel CPUs, the programs affected most are virtual machines, servers, and emulators. Developers of Fortnite saw the stress on their multiplayer servers almost double after the patch was installed. Valve backed out of a $1 million Philippine Dota tournament due to take place on the 15th, after finding out entrants would be drug tested upon arrival. Although people reporting on it at the time didn't realise it, I believe Valve were most likely worried about competitors being harmed by the country's current dead until proven innocent crusade against any alleged drug dealers, and made the right call in pulling their backing. Then, Spanish developers were miserable to find out that a €2 million grant aimed to encourage local game studios would be cut. Later in the month, however, it was revealed that the grant was cut so that it could be replaced with an even bigger grant of €6.5 million, which will be split between the country's 450 developers. That leads us back into the good news, which of course means the Nintendo Switch, which has dominated this month in more ways than one. It is now the fastest selling console ever in Japan and America, outselling the Wii U's entire lifetime in 10 months. Perhaps because of this, a Switch emulator has already been announced. Called Yuzu, it comes from the same team that made Citra, the open source, 3DS emulator. Awesome Games Done Quick 2018, the yearly speedrunning event, started on the 7th, bookended by two of last year's biggest hits, Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy and Breath of the Wild. But it was Jesus' Bloodborne run and the Link to the Past randomizer run that were people's highlights. They even ran an Animorphs game for some reason. I love those books. The event was uncharacteristically drama-free this year, apart from some kickback over the chat, which for the first time, being subscriber only, required a $5 donation to join. But in an interesting turn of events, the total amount raised was just short from last year's total, until they added in that pot and pushed it over the line, making it a $2.3 million for the Prevent Cancer Foundation. And the non-speedrunning highlight was the event manager singing Snake Eater at the end of a comeback MGS3 run.
I'm still in a dream, Snake Eater.
The second of the month's three big events also happened later that week. A Nintendo Switch Mini Direct that turned out to not be so mini, with a load of game announcements including one big surprise that's really got me excited, we'll get to those later. But following up the Direct was Nintendo Labo, a line of DIY console accessories made of cardboard. Aimed at kids, the kits mostly take the form of standard peripherals, fishing rods, steering wheels and the like, but some take advantage of the Joy-Con's weirder features in a cool way. Remember that useless IR sensor in the right controller? That's how you play the piano. And the robot kit, sold separately from the others, looks like it controls a game based on the much hyped but never released Project Giant Robot from the Wii U era. Opinions been split on the Labo, with lots of people calling out the expensive price for what is essentially cardboard, but I love the idea. It even includes a kid-friendly visual programming language, which seems to have been glossed over by most people, although I assume it to be very basic until further notice. The Labo isn't even the weirdest peripheral news to come out of January, as Xbox has, for some reason, decided to resurrect their stupid frisbee of a controller, the Duke, the original Xbox's first gamepad. Its creator says the reason for the Duke coming back is it was comfortable for those with big hands, but personally I'm expecting to see it used as a blunt weapon more often than a gamepad. Also coming back for round 2 is Mad Catz, the maker of that one controller your little brother would use. The company had began to forge a new reputation for itself with its fight sticks, which were much higher quality than the knockoffs it was known for, but not in time to save it from bankruptcy. Hopefully it'll do better this time around. At the complete opposite end of the peripheral spectrum is the Vive Pro, which HTC has announced as an even more expensive version of its VR headset. It features an upgrade to 1440p for each eye and an extra camera for depth perception with the headset on, but people are mainly hoping that its release will mean a much needed drop in price to the original Vive headset, making it more accessible to the standard gamer. More important than that is the Vive wireless adapter, now confirmed for the third quarter this year, that will fix the main complaint with both of these headsets: the trailing wires that made moving around a nightmare.
Oh shit!
Sony is also planning VR innovations, as shown by 2 patents for renovated PSVR controllers that now include a thumbstick for movement, something that gamers have wanted for ages now that VR games are starting to figure out how to do locomotion while avoiding motion sickness. The new controller also features finger tracking, but that hints at a release of a PSVR 2 rather than an upgrade compatible with existing PSVR sets. The third week of the year opened with strong allegations against Sony studio Quantic Dream, with 3 separate reports condemning them for an atmosphere of inappropriate behaviour, discrimination, inhumane working hours, 15-hour days, 60 to 90-hour weeks, and toxicity. The company put out a standard boilerplate statement categorically denying all of the claims, but before that, CEO, and decades-long creepy man, David Cage, put out a far more interesting denial, stating this in defence of the homophobia, sexism and racism allegations. You want to talk about homophobia? I work with Ellen Page, who fights for LGBT rights. You want to talk about racism? I work with Jesse Williams, who fights for civil rights in the USA. Judge me by my work. Ellen Page has previously considered legal action against the studio after the game she worked on contained a fully nude model of her body without her knowledge or permission. Later that week, PlayStation would go on to announce Totaku, a range of mascot figures priced to compete with amiibos, but without the interactive DLC direction, only for the news to get completely overshadowed by the fact that PS4 firmware version 4.05 and under is successfully hacked. The fledgling scene has already created tools for running homebrew and, very interestingly to me, backing up PS2 games to be used by the console's excellent PS2 emulator. Every PS4 has the emulator, which includes features like increased internal resolution, built in, but can only play games that have been rebought as part of the PS2 Classics program, of which there's only about 50 games to choose from. Loading games through the hack method allows any PS2 game to be played, including those that weren't playable back on the PS3's emulator. Over on the other side of the playground, Microsoft has committed to adding all its future first-party games to its Xbox Game Pass service on launch day. There may not be all that many of them, but it's undoubtedly a great move for consumers, being pretty much the equivalent of all upcoming DC movies being put on Netflix the day they come out in cinemas. Everyone seems to be a winner with the value this adds to Game Pass, including devs, who will receive a steadier income than the turbulence of sales revenue. But it does point to a change in Microsoft's monetization strategy. This is a business move after all, it has to be profitable, hinting that more of their games may rely on microtransaction and DLC sales rather than an upfront fee going into the future. Lowering the barrier of entry by including these games in Games Pass will lead to more players in their ecosystem in the hopes of larger microtransaction profits, similar to the business strategy of free-to-play games. Nintendo also finally announced a date for their subscription service, the one everyone hoped they'd forgotten about. Switch's multiplayer will require a paid subscription from September this year. Details are still suspiciously scarce, but what we do know is that the rather derided incentive of one NES game a month has been reworked to a service, not unlike Microsoft's Game Pass, which gives a whole library of classic games you have access to as long as you stay subscribed. They also released a Pikachu-coloured new 2DS XL at the end of the month, which is cute but rather garish, as well as upside down. Nintendo did score big elsewhere by hiring Ojiro Fumoto, the man behind Downfall, one of mobile's best games. And in other people shuffling news, Sonic co-creator Yuji Naka has joined Square Enix, leaving behind his indie studio Probe to create an enjoyable game. Developers of the SteamWorld series, which has one of my most enjoyable games in recent years, and the upcoming Fi, Image and Form and Zoink, have merged to form Thunderful Studio. Although both studios will continue their games with pretty much unchanged plans, this is mainly a feel-good story that the two studios, who hail from the same Swedish city and have worked together so closely that their chiefs are good friends, are now moving together under the same roof. Unfortunately, one thing in gaming that's even more prevalent than new beginnings is endings, and January saw the bucket being kicked for more than a few, both old and new. Return to Boletaria is a yearly event that aims to populate the world of Demon Souls full of players, and, this time, wants to keep people playing right up until February 28th when the servers shut down into what fans are calling the final slumber. Algernon, a controversial and mismanaged MMO, nonetheless held on for an impressive 10-year tenure, until this month its remaining fans were surprised by the game's removal from Steam. What was supposed to be a temporary downtime looks like it has now become, without any sort of announcement or fanfare, a permanent end. Two modern MOBAs didn't even last that long, with Epic deciding to kill off Paragon. After the devs confirmed that key staff were being moved from Paragon to support their mainstream success story that is Fortnite Battle Royale, the writing was very much on the wall, and indeed less than a week later Epic had announced the plug would be pulled on April 26th. The contrast between the two games had made the choice much easier for Epic, one struggling to pull in enough players to be sustainable, and the other frequently one of the top games on Twitch. Despite obviously lamenting ending Paragon, apologising to fans in candid statements and offering refunds for every microtransaction ever made in the game, they're making the only sensible business decision. Gigantic, the MOBA by Perfect World, is also done before its time. After only 2 years, 7 months of which locked to the Windows 10 store, which can't have helped player count, the colourful hero shooter has released its final update. Surprisingly in-depth given its release alongside the bad news, the January 31st update even adds a final hero, Tiamat, who will be joining the others in being unlocked to all players, as the game will now be completely free, microtransactions disabled and everything, until the servers shut down on July 31st. I highly recommend everyone join me in giving it a shot sometime before then. Shoryuken fighting game forums were also due to shut down, giving until the end of the month for years of fighting game knowledge to be archived. Its founder pointing to all the other alternatives for info such as YouTube and Reddit in the gradual fading of the forums that was so important in the early days of fighting games. But, thanks to a huge fan outpouring at the announcement, alternative plans were made, migrating to Discord and setting up a Patreon to continue the forums. Gravity Rush 2 was also due to have its online servers shut down in January, just a single year after its launch despite being a Sony published title, but once again the vocal fans have helped out and the server shutdown has been pushed back to July 29th. A 6-month delay might not be as much of a success as Shoryuken turning defeat into what could be a comeback bigger and better than ever, but there's now plenty of time to play this underrated PS4 exclusive at the leisurely pace it deserves. Speaking of delays, there's more than enough of them in stock this month. Legend of Bumbo, the next game from Binding of Isaac creator Edmund Macmillan, missed its December release and is now coming in the first half of 2018. The Crew 2 has been delayed a vague 2 to 7 months into May-September, and if you pre-ordered it you should have been fully refunded by the time you're watching this video. EA tells us Anthem has been delayed to early 2019, despite insisting that it hasn't. We Happy Few has been delayed to summer, being removed from early access, and Ys 8's PC port has been delayed for a second time, just days before its release on the 30th, this time indefinitely. Publisher NIS America apologised, and admitted that they'd taken on far more than they could handle with working on the port, saying that they would be handing off the job to another developer. While the attitude of not wanting to release a subpar version of the game could be praised, speculation that NIS America was only awarded the contract by over-promising a simultaneous launch with the relocalization update, turning the day into a soft relaunch of the game, has once again disappointed fans who tell me that Falcom's otherwise superbly reviewed JRPG could have been the breakout game for the series to land in the West, just like Persona 5 was for its franchise last year. In a welcome change that I think I've literally never seen before, one game has been the opposite of delayed. Banner Saga 3, the conclusion to the trilogy's launch date, has been brought forward from December to sometime this summer, likely due to the small team growing from 4 to 11 people. We don't even have a word for being undelayed, that's how rare it is. Good on Team Stoic. Now, most people may not have heard of Todd Rogers, but in the 80s and in the speedrun community he was a huge name. Said to be the first professional gamer, he set what Guinness World Records calls the longest standing video game record and has a frankly insane amount of records in classic Atari Activision games. Last year it was proven through various in-depth memes that his most famous high score, 1980's Dragster, was faked, which prompted YouTuber Apollo Legend to look into his many other records. After using some excellent investigative skills, which you can see in his video in the description, he found that many of the man's other records are likely also faked, most in unbelievable or stupid ways. To understand how, you need to know that speedrunning didn't always need such a heavy burden of proof as it does today. If you wanted to set out and prove that you held the record for a game now, your claim wouldn't even start to be considered legitimate unless you had a full public video with matching split times to prove your claims. Back in the day, you simply sent in a Polaroid photo of your TV screen and later a VHS recording that is shown only to a referee working for the main speedrunning website, Twin Galaxies. The Polaroid of Rogers' most famous record has apparently been lost to time. His time on barnstorming wouldn't be possible even if all the obstacles were removed. One of his times were made up because the real time was covered by a coffee stain on the photo. He entered his own scores at least once, scored a number ending in 990 in a game that only counts up in 50s, had several scores that end on suspiciously round numbers, and a record that is 1,118 times higher than second place. There were many people doubting the validity of Rogers' claims even at the time, but they were shut down by those with a vested interest in keeping their community's biggest celebrity from being branded a fraud. Todd was literally too big to fail. Even now, it took all this evidence and an unignorable amount of sustained bad publicity. But, as of the 31st, Rogers was finally stripped of his fake records. And now for the rapid fire round. Tingle's Balloon Trip of Love gets a fan translation 9 years after release for lovers of obscure DS games or creepy spandex men. Deadly Premonition, the game so weird nobody knows if it's good or bad, has a board game now. Nintendo is working on a new Mario movie, this time an animated one by Illumination, makers of Despicable Me, so hopefully it won't be a harrowing experience this time. Following in Nintendo's mini-console footsteps, we're getting a mini Commodore 64 on March 29th. And Snoop Dogg got a job where all he had to do was pretend to play games on Twitch and get paid, which he then screwed up immediately by lighting a blunt. Because of course he did.
Alright, up north, let's hit the cradle, baby. Let's hit the cradle. Get some of that sweet juice.
Let's go!
The first stage of the inaugural Overwatch League started on the 10th of January, with lots of people dubious about how popular competitive Overwatch could be. But after the first week, it was clear to be a roaring success. ActiBliz went all out with the production of the streams, and the players doing the same with great matches led to huge viewership and crowds of people's first passionate introduction to esports. The city-based teams brought out team rivalries in a way new to digital tournaments, and bars and viewing parties showed Overwatch on big screens to cheering fans, just like they would for rugby. The first week of Overwatch League scored 10 million total viewers, with an average of 280,000 people watching at once. There were lots of amazing plays, with New York's Pine seeming to team wipe every time he subbed back in, and sniping from Seal's Fletter. But amazingly, the best play of the week wasn't from any of the league players, it was this guy's Doomfist. Overwatch League Stage 1 continues into February, and the grand final will be in July. In Counter-Strike news, the CSGO Boston Major wrapped up on the 28th, hauling in an unheard of for Twitch, 1.1 million viewers at once. Cloud9 beat out FaZe after a tumultuous match and took the trophy, making it the first time a North American team have won a major. This is where the Switch really begins to dominate the month, receiving a huge amount of ports to buff up its early lifecycle library. Stickbold is the first to come around, offering a fun dodgeball party game with a surprising story mode. Then, for Europeans, the return of the 2-packs that we got all over the place in the GBA era, bundling Sonic Forces and Puyo Puyo Tetris for the price of one. On the 11th, Fury, The Escapists 2 and Super Meat Boy all came out on the same day. Meat Boy in particular did extremely well, reaching the same number of sales as it did on its original launch. Then came Gunhouse, a matcha/tower defense hybrid with a disaster piece soundtrack, Darkest Dungeon, Ambition of the Slimes, an RPG where you try to possess the human race, World to the West, Chromagun, an FPS puzzler that wears its inspiration on its sleeve, and Shu. If you feel the need for something brand new though, 3 games came out for Switch this month, also releasing simultaneously on PC and the home consoles. Lost Sphere is a spiritual successor to Tokyo RPG Factory's I Am Setsuna, and offers more of the same nostalgic JRPG-ness. Inner Space is an Absu-like explorer where you voyage through a serene inside-out world, and the standout, Celeste, is a platformer that charges the player with climbing the titular mountain. It's been praised for just about every aspect, from the way it merges story with gameplay to its soundtrack, and has been awarded rave reviews across the board. The 3DS didn't quite get left out of the action either, getting a Pokemon Crystal port with renewed multiplayer thrown up on the eShop, and Kirby Battle Royale, the party game that inspired Epic's little-known spin-off, finally made its way to North America. Xbox One finally gets excellent murder mystery The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, almost 3 years after the remastered PS4 and PC versions, with the bizarre inclusion of an option to turn the murder off. The new free roam mode making the game into a stress-free walk around a lovely, completely non-bloodstained valley. Also out now for consoles is Kerbal Space Program Enhanced Edition, Squad's second attempt at bringing their addicting space sim to consoles after the first was deemed completely broken. Based on a later PC version and handled by Blitzworks, a much more experienced team, I haven't got my hands on it yet to test it out, but there's hope for it this time around. The Impatient, a PSVR exclusive prequel to 2015's brilliant narrative game Until Dawn, Digimon Story Hacker's Memory, sequel to 2016's surprisingly good Cyber Sleuth, and Dissidia NT, the Final Fantasy fighting game, which has completely reworked gameplay, focusing on slower 3v3 combat instead of the 1v1s from previous games in the series. The indisputably biggest releases of the month both came out on the same day, causing a lot of hard choices for fans of both series. Monster Hunter World is the game that's been eating up all my time this month, bringing the series away from the horrible to control handheld versions for the first time since the Wii. The always solid hunting upgrading Monhun formula remains mostly unchanged, but everything around that has been met with huge quality of life improvements that should have been made ages ago, and it really lets the gameplay shine through. There's still some clunk there, don't let any amount of "oh it used to be worse" from series veterans persuade you otherwise, but the spectacle of open areas and interacting monsters, coupled with all the weapons that cater to so many playstyles, there is literally something for everyone, means Monster Hunter has been opened up to a whole new world of fans. Then, Dragon Ball FighterZ is the biggest fighting game to come out in a long time, blowing all the other modern fighting games out of the water in terms of players. The combination of Dragon Ball's worldwide popularity and the obvious love Arxis put into the game, even matching attacks to panels of the manga, means this is the game that will be appearing at tournaments for years to come. If, like me, you aren't into fighting games but want to be, there's never been a better time to get in there because of Rising Thunder, an abandoned robot fighting game that, instead of being left to slowly fade away like so many other abandoned games, has been given back to its fans in the form of a community edition. Released completely free, no strings attached, with an open source server that the community has already patched up, it's more than worth giving a go to decide if putting the work into competitive fighting games is up your alley. We also saw several surprise hits come to PC. Nantucket, a whaling management sim sequel to 1851's Moby Dick, sounds like the type of dumb idea that shouldn't work, but judging by the reviews, definitely does. Rusty Lake Paradise is the latest in the super creepy Rusty Lake point-and-click horror series. Full Metal Furies, a co-op ARPG from Rogue Legacy devs. Or, if you want more J in your RPGs, Le Grand Legacy and Zwei the Arge's Adventure, an English remake of the 2001 Japan-only game. As always, many different games hit Steam Early Access this month, but the two that look like they have the most potential are My Time at Portia and Trailmakers. My Time at Portia is a 3D post-apocalyptic farming crafting game in the vein of Stardew Valley or Rune Factory, but with a bigger focus on story. Trailmakers might look similar thanks to its equally colourful art style, but it focuses on a sandbox exploration mode and vehicle building physics. You'll have to build all sorts of different vehicles and contraptions to overcome obstacles and explore the world to find more parts. Personally, I'd wait for the full release to get into either, because they'll only get better with time and are both scheduled to be fully released, including on consoles, by the end of the year. Coming full circle, OKKO, the TV show based on video games, gets a video game adaptation, which turns out to be alright. The art style is a big step down from the show, adopting the same block-shaped styles seen in Steven Universe games, which it suited much better. But the fighting is fluid and fans of the show will be getting exactly what they'd expect. The Red Strings Club, on the other hand, is a standout release this month, featuring weighty writing and an intriguing story set in the backdrop of a cyberpunk bar, where you flush information from pundits by mixing different blends of cocktails. And finally, Iconoclasts is the extremely impressive culmination of 8 years of work for its single developer Cognac. If you haven't played his previous games, you should. They're almost all available free from his website, and if you have, you know exactly what to expect. Beautiful artwork and huge set-piece boss fights that wouldn't seem out of place in a Metal Slug game. Iconoclasts is a Metroidvania in name, but unlike Cognac's previous games, and the other great Metroidvania games of late, the big focus isn't on unique movement and gameplay features, instead concentrating on a story that's, so far, building an intriguing dystopian world that somehow seems both awful and charming. I had a great time with this game before Monster Hunter took over all my nights, and I can't wait to get back to it. Announced for some time before the end of the year are two police games that couldn't be more different. Rainswept is a character-driven murder mystery with a demo that you can play right now, and This Is the Police 2, set in a remote northern town called Sharpwood and announced with an intense trailer. I am fully on board for a second round of police management sim, especially with the more interesting setting and promises that you'll be more deeply able to participate in your officer's activities this time around. Burnout Paradise is getting an HD remaster. It will release in Japan on March 16th to presumably come to the rest of the world later on. Fans can argue all day over which Burnout they'd rather see remastered, but this testing of the waters for a possible new game should go down well with everyone. Warhammer 40k's Battlefleet Gothic is getting a surprise sequel with Armada 2. The first game ended up very unbalanced as more factions were added, and as the sequel contains more factions, some people are justifiably worried. But the spectacle of the new Tyranid faction's bioorganic spaceships fighting huge Gothic citadels means it'll probably be worth a check out. The Messenger is an 8-bit throwback platformer toting Ninja Gaiden influences, with a strong gimmick that sets it apart from all the other games in the crowded genre. I won't spoil it here, but you can watch the trailer if you want to find out exactly what that's about. With any luck, this could just be the next Shovel Knight. Feudal Alloy, a Metroidvania with distinctive hand-drawn art style and fishbowl-powered medieval robots, is scheduled for the third quarter this year, and Nintendo carries on their trend in bringing their big franchises to mobile with Mario Kart Tour coming sometime before March 2019. They also revealed something for pretty much everyone coming to Switch in their big mini direct, with a definitive version of Hyrule Warriors that has everything from both the Wii U and 3DS versions, which is a frankly insane amount of content, about 220 hours for a completionist. And a new Mario Tennis coming in spring. My initial reaction to Mario Tennis may have been a strong but it was then revealed to have boss fights and a story mode, the first in the series to do so since 2005, so there's a bit more to get excited about. SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy is coming in summer, and then, with specific release dates, Fi comes February 16th, Kirby Star Allies, bringing back the merging abilities mechanic, is March 16th, and a Dark Souls remaster on the 25th of May. Those hoping, or worrying, that the remaster would overhaul the game's lacking latter half or bring in more refined mechanics from the later games should know that, other than a slightly boosted multiplayer, the game will be pretty much unchanged. Fi and Dark Souls Remastered will also release simultaneously on PC and the two home consoles. The huge bombshell, for me at least, was The World Ends With You Final Remix, a cult classic that anyone who's played will know why I'm so thrilled about. This release includes all the added features of the mobile version, but seemingly has a control scheme somewhere in between that toned down version and the original's completely unique gameplay. Nintendo has confirmed both touchscreen and controllers can be used, which, combined with the Switch's many different control schemes, offers some interesting speculation. 2-player co-op with each Joy-Con maybe? In a twist nobody saw coming, the game also includes brand new story content, with a sizable post-game epilogue. 2 Japanese developers used the month to drop a load of game reveals all at once. CyberConnect 2 put out their plans for the entire next decade, with 3 games all linked by the same theme that they are calling the Trilogy of Vengeance. Fuga is the story of 11 children piloting a giant tank, Tokyo Ogre Gate, which looks a lot like the dreams I had of a Kill la Kill game, and Cecile, a Gothic 2.5D side-scroller. CC2 are expanding from 200 to 300 staff members so that they can self-publish these games alongside their normal contracted work. Nippon Ichi announced 2 new projects. The first, Liar Princess and the Blind Prince, the winner of a contest where company staff members floated their game ideas, has a hand-drawn art style that makes for some very appealing concept art, and Project Nightmare will be a live-action video horror game. Also revealed without a solid release date is 2 Point Hospital, a spiritual successor to Bullfrog's theme hospital that renovates that same comedic charm. Hylix 2, a trippy claymation JRPG. Deceiver combines first-person free-running with spider drone shooting. And 7 Billion Humans, a spiritual sequel to the dev's earlier game Human Resource Machine, which had you use a visual programming language to control an office worker. This time you can now control entire herds of office workers. New Gundam Breaker, which plays out as toy-scale living room warfare like a Japanese army men game, and Fable 4, which will be a fresh take on the franchise by the Forza Horizon devs. I'm optimistic about a different team approaching the IP after the later Fable games became less and less in tune with what fans of the series wanted. Lots of short notice games were announced with release dates coming up in the next month, starting off with Dandara on February 6th, a Metroidvania without jumping. The game's unique control scheme has the protagonist flick between certain walls, floors and ceilings, with no regard for gravity, in a way that makes the game perfect for touchscreens. On the 9th, Breakarts 2, a mech racer with insane customization, comes out for PC. A cutesy version of Final Fantasy XV comes to mobiles, and Descenders, a procedurally generated downhill mountain biking game inspired by downhill domination, comes to early access in a fairly finished form, with single player campaign and everything. On the 13th and 14th comes Kingdom Come: Deliverance, a medieval RPG that drops the fantasy for a more realistic story. Instead of some sort of chosen one, you play the son of a blacksmith drafted into a civil war. I think this game will live and die based on how fun its more grounded combat is, as very few developers have nailed first-person melee fighting. Then, Dio, a split-screen puzzle platformer that uses the actual split between screens as a mechanic, looks like it will be very interesting and has a demo out now. A game based on animated show Little Witch Academia leads out the month on February 20th. In April, Pillars of Eternity's sequel Deadfire arrives. You play as the captain of a ship as you build a crew and travel through an island archipelago in one of Obsidian's famously fleshed out worlds, coming on the 3rd. Extinction launches on the 10th, and Friday the 13th, Killer Puzzle, an obvious dream come true for the developers as they've been given permission to make an official game of the franchise their first murder puzzler was a loving homage to, that naturally releases on Friday the 13th. On the 20th, God of War's soft reboot with a Nordic overhaul hits PS4, and later on, promising a June launch with a beta sometime in May, is Onrush, an arcade racer by devs that worked on MotorStorm and Drive Club that brings back point-based racing, encouraging stunts and taking out rival racers with a whole roster of vehicles from bikes to huge 4x4s. Over on Kickstarter we have Genesis Noir, a beautifully hard to define game with a chalk on blackboard art style, set before, during and after the Big Bang. The game plays with scale in interesting ways, telling a story that happens on both a personal and cosmic level. It set itself up with a very achievable goal of $40,000, which it needs to secure by the 16th. Dino Run 2, the follow-up to the game everyone remembers playing in school when every other website was blocked, also has a very achievable goal at $20,000 by February 22nd. But it's a very unusual campaign in that the Kickstarter will only fund pre-production, or going up to a single level of the game if they blow past their target by a huge amount. Seemingly, they just want to fund building enough of the game to make a compelling pitch to publishers or sponsors, and will also be raising money from every single revenue stream you could think of on the internet: Patreon, Drip, Early Access and direct donations. This strange manner of crowdfunding is probably related to the game's failed Kickstarter way back in 2013. It raised a not too shabby $85,000 way back then, but missed out on funding because of its lofty target of $175,000. The game concept looks much the same as it did those 4 whole years ago, even reusing a lot of assets for the current fundraising campaign, but it's unclear if the game has been worked on during that time or just lain dormant. Cerebral is a game aiming much higher with a target of $278,000 by February 27th. It'll need a big push to get there, but the 2v2 fighting game has the music and general style nailed, making it a promising one to look forward to if it does get funded. Only a single character is fully fledged out so far, but you can test her out in the playable demo, basically a training room to get a feel for the game, and there are a lot more character concepts outlined. Plus, always awesome, a vote has been put up for backers to choose their favourite additional character, this time in an 8-man tournament bracket. There are some strong choices, but really, why would you not pick Knife Squad? And now we're done getting excited about things we can't have yet, it's time to look at the things we can. The amazing modder Zilandro has been hard at work this month, adding a pair of subtle animation additions to Fallout New Vegas that seem small but make a big difference in modernising the game. Diagonal movement and weapon inertia are things you might not even notice unless you're looking for them, but they really improve how nice the game feels to control, and enough tweaks like that work together to completely transform the game's atmosphere. On top of this, a mod called LED, or Lead I guess, changes New Vegas' hit scan weapons to real projectiles, great for sniper characters. Fallout 4 also got some good stuff with Full Souls, a mod that lets time carry on unhindered when you're in menus, named so because it's just like Dark Souls. Despite the name, this small tweak makes a big difference to the game as you can no longer just stop time and re-heal in the middle of a fight. The world doesn't stand still for you anymore. And a Metal Gear Solid 5 style distraction system that lets you lure enemies to you by whistling or by throwing bolts as a diversion, both fully animated in first and third person. This adds some much needed tactical depth to Fallout's stealth system, and it's made by the same person who created quite possibly the most important mod for the entire game. Overwatch has added Blizzard World, a new map themed as an amusement park based on the developer's other games, and alongside it the first new batch of non-limited skins and intros to be added since launch. And, of course, all anyone cares about is Black Cat Diva. Actiblizz also added skins themed after the teams in the Overwatch League, but annoyingly they can only be brought with a new premium currency. If you want more than one character decked out in your favourite team's colours, that'll be $5 each. Oof. Splatoon 2 started its first Splatfest of 2018 with players fighting, this time worldwide, over which is better, action or comedy. What is likely the game's last new map launched alongside the event, Schellendorf Institute, a 2-level arena set in a museum. Fortnite players had a fun week as a glitch was discovered allowing them to hide underneath the world, racking up kills from safety. Epic worked overtimes to rush out a fix in under a day, but made up for it later by introducing a big update which added 3 cool new areas to the previously empty west coast, and the rest of the map got new biomes alongside other small tweaks. Old School Runescape celebrated its 5th anniversary by making a sequel to its most famous quest, Dragon Slayer, ahead of the game's release on mobile, which started to be rolled out in closed beta at the end of the month. It's been a month full of up and downs for Ubisoft's big multiplayer games, even outside of The Crew 2's big delay. Ghost Recon Wildlands added loot boxes that were even worse than the usual standard of today, no way of being obtained in-game, UK players being charged twice as much as those in other countries for no real reason, and being full of duplicate items despite repeated promises they wouldn't be. Rainbow Six Siege has been praised recently as an impressive example of turning around what initially looked like a flop with good post-launch support, even being re-reviewed and given a higher score by many outlets, but it looks like all that went to Ubi's head as they tried to raise the game's price back up to full price almost 2 years after it launched. Huge backlash from long-time players caused a back down on this almost immediately, but they did manage to sneak through a $20 increase to all the game's deluxe versions and the addition of loot boxes at the start of March. In a shocking turnaround, the Ubisoft game that came out ahead this month was For Honor. Mostly neglected since launch, suffering from balance lag and cheating problems, the game is finally getting dedicated servers, which should help with 2 of those. It might come too late for the game to live up to the potential it had at launch, but it should at least pull back some players who dropped off of the game. Ubi also accidentally released the Assassin's Creed DLC a week early for some players. Very swiftly patched, the publisher did however let those who had already started the DLC keep playing before it officially released, because they were worried removing it may break their save games. In early access, Warhammer 40k Martyr, the ARPG that had, up to now, received middling reviews, added the first level of its story mode, a 3rd class, and revamped the unpopular levelling system with its 0.7 update. They Are Billions continues absolutely nailing it with an update adding waypoints, more discoverables around the map and extra languages to the already excellent RTS. They even promised that the entire soundtrack will soon be re-recorded with the same symphonic orchestra that worked on Arkham Origins. Leaving early access is Subnautica, which added the last of its story mode, dick-based party game Genital Jousting, which somehow also has a story mode now, and Rust, which is still pretty much just as unfinished, it just now sells for more money and without the warning that it's not done yet. A designer even told players to think of it like we're leaving prototyping and entering alpha, which is, I'm fairly certain, not how finished games work. RimWorld is also due to leave early access with its next patch, and although no date was given for that, its lead dev did write a really interesting post on the difficulties of balancing suggestions and feature requests as an early access developer, which I'll link in the description. Kentucky Route Zero dropped a surprise interlude in the lead up to its final episode. This free experience places you behind the scenes of a local TV channel and has a full half-hour long live action video of the channel alongside some more hidden stuff up on a website. As you might expect if you know the game at all, it's all very artsy and very strange. Gran Turismo Sport adds 10 new cars and a new track, Monza, home of the Italian Grand Prix. ARMS gets a tournament mode, gallery and extra party mode stuff, despite Nintendo saying they've ceased support for the game. Hollow Knight has announced its final free DLC, titled Gods and Glory, alongside proof they're hard at work on a Switch version, and Absolver, an open-world melee fighter, leans even further into its FGC inspirations and makes theory crafters rejoice by adding in all the data you could ever want for each attack, impact on guard, stamina cost, advantage frames on hit, etc., alongside balance tweaks. And in a show called Patch Notes, it would be wrong to gloss over the impressive level of detail the devs put into their update post. Monster Hunter World has also committed to free content updates after launch, the first of which will add the Cucumber Wyvern Devil Joe, and the second, a Street Fighter V crossover of all things, lets PS4 hunters play as Ryu. Coming to other platforms as well later in the year alongside Sakura, This might seem like a really weird idea for a crossover, and it is, but you've got to remember this is the same franchise that crossed over with Metal Gear so that Snake could fight a Rathalos. And that was January. I hope you had a great start to the year. If you have any suggestions for the show, hit me up in the comments or on Twitter. Thank you for watching, and come rain or shine, I'll be back again on the 5th of Feb. See you then.